Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be here in the United States, anywhere around the world. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a start of a great week. Just going to provide a little bit of background information for the articles for the week. Just want to let you know if you look at the syllabus, there's three articles identified there. Cigarettes and high heels, another article by Dinesi. You read a Dinesi article on week one about sort of what is popular culture. Then there's Branding 101 by Twitchell. Remove that article. We're not going to cover that article. I went back and looked over the articles. There's some interesting and valuable information in that article, but it's long, it's detailed, it's not, I don't think it conveys the information that's going to be worth your time and energy as far as going through an article. So we're going to drop Branding 101. That's reading review number 9. I'm still going to keep the number sequence that we're going after, so I'm not going to change the syllabus because I think that creates too much confusion. So we will drop Branding 101 and reading review number 9. For week number 4, it's going to be Cigarette and High Heels and Branded Identities, both of those articles. That's reading review 8 and reading review 10. And then the other thing for this week is another video called No Logo by Naomi Klein. So we'll kind of talk about the two articles a little bit, just give you some background, some context, and then talk about the No Logo campaign as well. Part of that, so last week you read really about some history, development of advertising. Edward Bernays, the father of spin, really about early ideas about advertising, and then moving through kind of contemporary society about the ubiquitousness of advertising, just its proliferation in everyday culture and everyday life, and a critique of that a lot of advertisings contain ideology, values, beliefs, ideals, and move us towards it gets into our identities of who we believe we are, and go back to this idea that advertising helps to create dissatisfaction. It also helps to shape cultural ideals and sort of ways of life. I'll give you an example. Think about gender and gender identity and gender development. Through mass media and through pop culture is a space where we develop a lot of notions about gender expectations, dress, appearance, who we are, what we should be representing. It's not that there's one uniform message, but there is definitely patterns within that message. There's a lot of critique about the ways in which women are represented in the media, and increasingly about the male body in the media, the hyper-masculine male body in the media. An idea, it wasn't until probably 1970s, 1980s, really maybe about that time period, where we started to move toward what's called hyper-masculinity. And it's, males now become bigger and stronger. In some ways, that could be read as a reaction and a response to a move towards greater gender equality, the feminist movement of the 1970s, greater economic disparity between the top and the bottom, so greater concentration of wealth at the top, left a lot of working class individuals more economically in peril or struggling, and just sort of the class struggle becomes more significant. We're moving away from a manufacturing society to consumer society. So it's through all that kind of stuff that the hyper-masculine body starts to emerge in popular culture and ideology. A great movie called Fight Club, if you've never seen it. It's a kind of a story about the development of a hyper-masculine culture and the guys trying to reclaim what it means, what they believe it means to be masculine, to be male. All of those things are negotiated and identified through popular culture, through mass media, through advertising. Sky Vodka is an advertisement that's got a lot of criticism for its depiction of women, as well as depiction of women and its depiction of men. And beer and alcohol advertisements are rich for semiotic analysis. So we'll kind of talk about that's the importance and the value of looking at advertising. It's not just selling products, it's selling ideas, it's selling ways of life, it's selling ideologies. And the more that we're informed and educated about that, we can become more critical consumers. And I think that creates better, stronger communities, and it helps us to foster identities in ways that puts us more in the driver's seat of that, becoming more critically aware. So that's kind of the reason and the importance. The branded identities article, a couple things in that kind of addressing this move towards lifestyles, If you go back to early industrialization and products that were being promoted, they call them ER advertising. Like it's when I was a kid growing up, there was a what did you call it? I guess it's a kind of a paper towel, just a paper towel for your kitchen, right? And it was brawny, the quicker picker upper. And those are all E words, right? The quicker picker upper. And that was one way in which commodities were being differentiated, was sort of through these adjectives. Well, increasingly starting in the 1970s, 1980s, it's really become about lifestyle. The things that we purchase, the things that we do, it's about identity formation, it's about our lifestyle, it's sort of about what we do. It's getting further and further into our identities and sort of who we are, this move in advertising and mass consumption. And what Barber kind of talks about is this sort of commercialization of identity. That if you want to just look at it, just sort of try to make a stark comparison, try to imagine before a time period of mass marketing and advertising and that sort of commercial space, and that invasion of that commercial space, or inclusion of that commercial space into your private life. Before that time period, we formed our identities within communities. It's through the people that we are connected with. That could be within our civic organizations, it could be within our family, our religious institutions if we belong to them. These are places we formed identity. In some ways, those identities were removed from the commercial sphere, and they happened within different structures and institutions. Once we start to develop sort of a new model of capitalism, starting in the with new technologies, going back to an article from week number, I guess from a previous week, is that 1920 is a watershed period where new technologies, new ways of reaching the audience, new strategies for reaching the audience, it could be read as a way to kind of really increase market capital. It's going to increase the development and the movement of commodities and goods. It's also a vehicle to move ideology and to move beliefs and move ideals. And it's further and further gets incorporated into our identity, or we have to navigate that space now in different ways. So Barber talks about this commercialization of identity. It's not only like who we are in terms of our moral self built on our interaction with people in the community. It's about what I'm wearing, what I'm eating, where I'm going to vacation, what I'm doing. These are lifestyle things that are going on, a cluster of lifestyles. And it's a reflection of our identity. We're buying things. We're buying more than a product. We're buying an identity that goes along with that. And that's relatively new, historically speaking. He also uses the phrase infantilized ethos, that what it's doing to us, in a way, it's trivializing the human condition, that it's putting it into, that humans become commodified in a way. It's very inauthentic, what the promises are in terms of what we're buying and what the advertisement says and what's actually happening are two different things sometimes. So it's inauthentic. It's a propaganda, to go back to Bernays. I mean, he was deliberate. It's about propaganda. It's about promoting particular products and particular ideas. And what Barber argues is that this decreases our own agency as humans, that we become we become sheeple. We're following kind of the system, the dictates of the system. And there's a challenge to community now all of a sudden too, where maybe we were integrated into communities in a different way, but now it's sort of, with all these different lifestyle choices, it's more of a fragmentation of identities, and it creates some strain and struggle within our relationships and our communities and sort of overall kind of social systems. And it's a challenge for democracy. I think he uses the example of sports stadiums, this has just become a common everyday place now where and we're less reactive and less critical perhaps of it, but identifying public institutions, or I guess, the sports stadiums are private institutions, but oftentimes funded by public dollars, but it's the identification of putting corporate names on these particular public spaces. He raises the question of whether or not that's actually harmful or detrimental to the formation of democracy. It becomes more commercial over democratic principles. So that's kind of, I think, an important critique that's sometimes hard to get at, but sometimes easy to see, if that made any sense. I don't know. Another thing, schools become another example, K through 12 schools, the intrusion of the commercial space into schools. schools are intended for education, socialization, and into a lot of different habits, ways of being, knowing, knowledge, all that kind of stuff. When schools, start to become like Channel 1 used to be a video channel that used to be piped in. I'm not even sure if they're around anymore. But schools were basically being supplied with TVs. Kind of like the idea was, we'll give you these TVs, we'll give you this technology, and in return, you play Clear Channel for us. And Clear Channel was a lot of advertising and marketing within those Clear Channel programs. So kids were in a public space, kids were being indoctrinated into particular ideas, and schools were benefiting from, getting this technology. They didn't have to spend budgetary, money to be able to get the televisions, but they also had to agree to include this commercial space within the public arena. That's the challenge to the democratic kind of order and democratic system. One other thing to kind of identify is kind of make a kind of a separation in some ways between this industrial, early industrial to where we're at today, post-industrial. I think it may be helpful. Early industrial, you could say like 1700s, 1800s, all the way till early 1900s. The focus is on goods, manufacturing. It's about development of a manufacturing center. It's not necessarily focused so much about advertising and marketing quite yet. It's about providing goods and services. Also, the ethos or the idea of the day was public was to save money. I mean, Benjamin Franklin's statement, a penny saved is a penny earned, is the quintessential sort of Protestant ideal of this goes back way before, the 1800s, but the idea of a Protestant ideal of saving money is a virtue. That's early industrialization. Early industrialization tended to be also more rural, kind of starting to move towards an more urbanized economy. Also built on rationality, and that products had a use value. So there was a utilitarian or a value that was built in the product itself. So toothpaste was just toothpaste, to go back to an example I used before. And there may be very few different brands, and there's no reason to distinguish between them, right? It had a use value, it was intended for a particular thing. And if you look at early advertisements, it was rich in description. It wasn't rich in terms of image yet. And that's a major transformation to go from text in terms of informing kind of the consuming public about here's a product, here's what it does, to now all of a sudden it's just images, very little text. Because it's selling an idea, it's selling emotion, it's selling identity, not necessarily selling what the actual product does. So that's an early industrial, post-industrial. It's about identity. Things are about, lifestyle becomes much more important. We're encouraged to spend, not to save. So we have a system, an economic system that's built on mass consumption. The whole global economic system is one that's predicated or built upon mass consumption. There are some who argue that the best thing that we can do to maintain this economy is to continue on mass consumption because that feeds the economy. Now there's some truth to that, but there's limitations, and there's a critique of that as well. Who's benefiting from all that consumption? What are the environmental as well as other consequences for that consumption? And we're not just consuming a good, we're consuming ideals and ideologies and values and beliefs. And it has ways of advertising and marketing are also, they're communicating ideas of race, class, gender, all kinds of different other things that are going on within that. So post-industrial is more focused on identity and movement of goods. It's more urban and suburban in terms of economy. And it's no longer about the use value of a product. It's more about the exchange value. It's about what does this product communicate about me and my identity? And that becomes an important distinction. So one way to think about it, maybe not even a product, think about like where we shop and why we shop in particular places. We shop in particular locations we become comfortable there. We go there enough times, it just becomes familiar, so we navigate that space. But I would argue that where we shop sometimes is a reflection of the lifestyle that we want to belong to. It may not be less about the products that are available there, but more about the idea of what we're consuming. It kind of gets into this fascinating area to kind of understand that interrelationship between commerce and individual identity and sort of economic conditions and structure and those kind of things. Hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of like reason why these articles are included, as well as some sort of discussion. The other article is about a lot of stuff about semiotics, and I really want you to take away from that article is if you can get just a general understanding of this sort of study of science, all the technical details of it, not as concerned about. I just want you to be kind of walk away from that going, I never really thought about like cigarettes and smoking, about all the signs that are going on within that. All the ways in which we carry our bodies and how we behave, that Goffman dramaturgy piece that's mentioned in the article, that these are scripts. These are ways of behaving that we're learning, that we develop. And these systems of signs are powerful. They're fascinating to examine and explore. And they really tell us a lot about culture. They tell us about power relations between different groups within society. And they help educate and inform us about kind of what's going on. And I will go back to like what I said at the beginning of this short little talk, is that through that information and education, it puts us, we become more empowered consumers, more critical consumers, hopefully, and more empowered. Okay, and then the no logo video is sort of a very critical. So no logo, Naomi Klein devoted a lot of her work to criticizing global capitalism. So she has a critique of global capitalism, no doubt about it. And she lays out her argument. Even if you disagree with her argument, that video I hope you find fascinating, interesting, and there's just so many great examples of advertisements back in the past. And you can see that comparison about advertising in the past versus the present. I think it'll give you good visuals about how this transformation of advertising has happened to better understand sort of where we are at today. All right, I'm going to sign off. Have a great week. Thanks for all that you all are doing for the class and for all of your classes. Carry on. Thanks so much. Enjoy the day.